Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Big Six, and today we are talking about Burnley and we are talking about the transfer link to Armando Broja from Chelsea. This one's broke in the last couple of days and it looks like it may happen, so I wanted to look at this transfer as it's raised some question marks, it's fair to say, around the fee, around Broja himself, and around whether or not this is the right player for Burnley. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we get into it, please like and subscribe to the channel. That helps a lot as we try and grow this page into something good. So before we dive into whether or not it's a good move and the logistics around it, what can Burnley expect from Broja when they sign him? He's a player that has been in the Chelsea system, I think, since like 2009. So he's had a good long stint as a Chelsea player, a Chelsea product anyway. He's had a lot of loans out. I'm just going to read it off the list here. But he's been on loan at Vitesse in the 2020-21 season, Southampton the season after, Fulham in the second half of the 23-24 season, and last season he was at Everton. There's been mixed success there, and that's largely the first two spells being very, very positive for Broja and him being touted as a potential, Chelsea player and somebody they could potentially hang their hat on. And then his last two spells at Fulham and Everton have been poor. They've been marred by injury and they just haven't went well for him. So now we have this player who is, 23, he's 24 in September, who's had a lot of potential, a lot of talk around him, but he feels almost homeless right now and he needs somewhere to really grow as a player, find a settled place. And Burnley could be a good option. It could be a good tick for both parties. And really, you've got to separate Broja's sort of career into two halves. There are the spells at Vitesse and Southampton. At Vitesse, he scored 11 and 34. At Southampton, he scored 9 and 38, both in all competitions. Then he was at Chelsea, and he was in and around the Chelsea team, largely as like an impact player off the bench. But then he got a huge injury in 2022. That seems to have set him back. And then since that injury, and what we've seen since at Fulham and Everton, and also kind of being on the periphery of the Chelsea team, Broja has not been the same player since then. And I think really this deal sort of hinges on the idea that Broja can be the player that we saw 3 or 4 years ago and not the player we are seeing now. And I think the other sort of asterisks I've put on this before we talk about, other areas of this deal is Scott Parker worked wonders with Alexander Mitrovic. And Broja, while obviously not the same player exactly, he is of a similar sort of profile. And I just wonder if Parker is looking at Broja and thinking this could be sort of Mitrovic 2.0 and I can get the most out of this player and turn him into a top striker. And that might be the thinking at Burnley, that Scott Parker has, a record with turning players' careers around. And maybe they look at Broja as a buying at their lowest point and turning it into something else. And that could be what Burnley are thinking. And I suppose if I was a Burnley fan and I was seeing this deal happening, the positives are very much that this guy has proved that he can play in the Premier League. When he was on loan at Southampton in the 21-22 season, Broja was very, very good. He was a good contributor to that team. He was a player that a lot of people looked at and thought, wow, this is a real potential future star in the Premier League. We talked about the injury. That has got a sort of factor in there. But Broja, in that season, he was one of the best aerial winners, very good at his duels. He was a decent ball carrier, good on the press. Didn't get a lot of grade A shooting chances, but did score largely in line with his XG. So there was reasons to think that this guy is a Premier League level striker, which is a massive sort of tick in that box. And I was going to maybe broach this later in the video, but I think maybe now is the time we're talking about positives. If you look at what Sunderland and Leeds, or the other promoted teams, have in terms of their forward department, Sunderland have got Wilson Isidore, Eliza Mayenda, and they're loaning in Mark Gui from Chelsea. Leeds have Joel Peru, I know Matteo Joseph and Patrick Bamford have been told they're not sticking around there. Don't know if I'm forgetting another striker there, but it feels like none of Sunderland and Leeds have massively experienced Premier League strikers. And Burnley do actually have. They've got Larson, who they've just brought in, who was on loan there previously. He's playing in the Premier League. They've got Lyle Taylor, who's playing in the Premier League. And Broja has also played in the Premier League. So they have Premier League experience in that front line. Whether or not it's the greatest Premier League experience, I don't know. But there is reasons to be positive in terms of this deal. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't talk about the negatives, which is just since that injury Broja picked up in 2022, he's not been the same player. He had injuries last season at Everton. He was only fit for, I think, 9. He missed 29 games through injury last season. And if Burnley are signing a player who is injury prone, who isn't going to be on the pitch a lot, that's obviously a massive problem. You know, this is a big amount of their transfer budget. This is clearly going to be one of their marquee signings this summer. They need Broja to be fit on that pitch. So that is the biggest red flag I could throw on this. I think we also have to talk about the transfer fee, which at £20 million, if that is to be believed and that is correct, you have to wonder where that fee's sort of coming from. This is a player who Chelsea do not want, who, as far as I can see, did not have masses of speculation and not lots of teams circling around to be like, right, we're going to take on Broja. So to come up with £20 million for a player that hasn't scored a goal in like 2 or 3 years seemed quite excessive. And I think it's interesting to sort of see that that is the fee that they've come up with. I would be more inclined to think that this could have been a loan with an obligation to buy. Maybe Chelsea just didn't want that because they wanted, you know, Broja probably wants a permanent new home and Chelsea probably would just want to get that transfer fee in. But it's interesting that this is the fee we are talking about, because I think £20 million for a player, look, it's not a massive amount, as ridiculous as that sounds in the Premier League right now, but it is a large amount of money for a player who has had struggles over the last couple of years. So that is my other red flag on this one. The injuries, but also I think the transfer fee feels quite excessive for a player who is basically been unproven for the last couple of seasons and has had injury problems. So what is my verdict overall? I think this is a really, really difficult one to assess, because if Broja is the player that Southampton had a few years ago and is able to refine that in a new home, and because he's in a permanent surrounding where he is potentially the main man, it is possible that Broja takes steps forward and improves as a player. I also think Scott Parker could get the best out of him, and I think that he does fit into how Burnley want to play. They've got good wingers, so having a centre forward who's very good in the air does make a lot of sense. But I also think, as stupid as this might sound, is this a player that other teams at the bottom of the Premier League would have signed? We've seen in the past that Fulham and Everton have taken a punt on this guy, probably with the thought of that if they did well, they might be able to sign him from Chelsea, and it hasn't worked. So we've seen teams have a go at Broja and it hasn't quite worked. And I don't think any other Premier League team is interested in Broja. So the fact that Burnley are willing to take this leap is a little bit of a red flag, that this is what they think is the best that they can get for their team. But admittedly, Burnley play in a more distinct style, so maybe that's why Broja is a better fit there. So I think really the question is are Burnley signing the Broja from 2 or 3 years ago, or are Burnley signing the Broja we saw last season that was injured and pretty unimpressive when at Everton and when he was on the field? And that is the question. That's probably what Burnley are going to live and die by this season. You know, if Broja is going to be their leading man, look, they've got other strikers, it must be said. But I think Burnley are probably looking at Broja as being their number one striker this season. This is the hill that they want to, you know, to die on. It's a bold move. You know, Broja, if he is that player we've seen in the past, it could be a genius move. You know, it could put them ahead of Sunderland and Leeds, because Sunderland and Leeds don't have a striker like that. But my concern is that Broja maybe is a victim of that injury and he's not the player that he once was. But I'm very interested to know what you think of this transfer move. I am lukewarm on it. I think if I was being brutally honest, I'd probably say that this isn't a move that I would make on a personal level if I was in charge of the purse strings at Burnley. But I get that it is hard to buy strikers who've got Premier League experience and who score goals in the Premier League. That is not easy to do, and it's not something that any of the other promoted Premier League teams have done. So plenty to discuss and digest. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please remember to like and subscribe and comment. You know, I love to interact with most people in the comment section, and we'll catch you for another video of Beyond the Big Six.